A very, very interesting story as we continue to talk about, factories in the US, the Trump tariffs, and all those kind of things. And we've been having discussions around the ability to create a lot of manufacturing infrastructure in the US and how easy it is to do that. And so that's why I thought this story was really interesting, because as many of you know, not that long ago, actually, LVMH, there are those pictures with Bernard Arnault and Donald Trump shaking hands when he built his factory in Texas where they were making Louis Vuitton bags. But now a lot of reports are coming out saying that LVMH's Louis Vuitton factory in Texas is actually the worst performing factory that they run globally. And so when we have these conversations around, in the US, they have the infrastructure and they have the staff and the skills to create the kind of manufacturing that you see across the world in countries that specialize in these things, in garment manufacturing, whether we're talking about Vietnam or we're talking about China, Turkey, Portugal, France, Italy, it goes on and on and on. You tend to find that, that isn't always the case. Someone is saying this is a New York Post. It's actually a Reuters article. As you can see, it even says by Reuters. It was just easier for me to open the New York Post article without like it being blocked behind a paywall. But the story is actually via Reuters. It's not via the New York Post. Just in case you didn't know, it's actually via Reuters. But anyway, reading on. So 6 years ago, LVMH's billionaire CEO Bernard Arnault and President Donald Trump cut the blue ribbon on a factory in rural Texas. As we all know, the site has consistently ranked amongst the worst performing for Louis Vuitton globally, significantly underperforming other facilities, according to 3 former Louis Vuitton workers and a senior industry source who cited internal rankings shared with staff, which is absolutely insane, right? Absolutely insane that their New York plant is performing the worst globally. You need to remember, LVMH produces in so many countries because they have so many factories, third party and, created by them themselves. So for it to be the worst one, I think it says a lot about how difficult it is to create this sort of infrastructure in an efficient way in the US. I think it says a lot, but let's read on. And that, of course, is the picture of Bernard Arnault and Donald Trump. Bernard Arnault, of course, was at Donald Trump's inauguration as well. So they tend to be on good terms. So we'll see how long that lasts. But for now, it should be that they are on good terms for now. Reading on. The plant's problems, which haven't previously been reported, highlight the challenges for LVMH as it attempts to build its production footprint in the US to avoid Trump's threatened tariffs on European-made goods. The ramp-up was harder than we thought it would be. That's true. Ludovic Pochard, Louis Vuitton's industrial director, said in an interview on Friday in response to detailed questions about Reuters' findings. Now, this is really interesting because, once again, a lot of people like to act like this infrastructure is going to be able to be created overnight. You literally have Louis Vuitton's industrial director who said that the ramp up was harder than they thought it would be. And this is a factory, mind you, this is a factory that they finalized the building of years ago. So they have had years to actually try and figure out the most efficient way to do it. And this report is now coming out in 2025 showing that, they're having issues. So they had so much time to work out the kinks with their manufacturing and it's still not good. So this idea that, we're just going to impose tariffs on everyone overnight and all the factories are going to be built and it's going to be just as efficient is nonsensical. And I've been saying it's nonsensical from the start. People, constantly argue with me and I don't know why, because it's common sense. And we have the reports to back all of this up. And we'll continue to have the reports to back all of this up. But reading on, the Texas site, situated on a 250-acre ranch, has struggled due to a lack of skilled leather workers able to produce at the brand's quality standards, the 3 former workers told Reuters. So, once again, they have had years to train the staff and they still can't find enough skilled workers. So how exactly are they planning on, ramping up the production in the US when with the little, luxury production hubs they have, they are struggling themselves to find workers that are skilled enough to create their leather bags to the quality and to the standard that they need it at. I don't know how they expect that to happen. Reading on, it took them years to start making the simple pockets of the Neverfull handbag. One source familiar with operations at the plant said, referring to the classic Louis Vuitton shoulder bag. Errors made during the cutting, preparation, and assembly process led to the waste of as many as 40% of the leather hides. Oh my god, 40% is insane. That is insane. 40% of the leather hides were going to waste. That is insane. I really want to know what they do with all of those leather hides that they get rid of. I hope they find a use for it, maybe by using those to make accessories and stuff. Because I recently visited the Celine factory, which is also an LVMH brand, and they use a lot of their like leather scraps and stuff to make accessories and belts and stuff like that. So I hope Louis Vuitton has a good way of using this waste, because that is so much waste. 40% is really, really insane. Like 40% is wild. But reading on, industry-wide, typical waste rates for leather goods are generally 20%, a senior industry source said. So their waste is double the industry standard. Insane. Several former employees who spoke to Reuters described the high-pressure environment. To boost production numbers, supervisors routinely turned a blind eye towards methods to conceal defects and in some cases encouraged them, 4 former employees told Reuters. And I mean, that doesn't surprise me that they are, trying to turn a blind eye so that they can meet production standards, especially when production standards are high, because once again, you cannot compare it to Italy or France, where in Italy and France, they have been producing luxury bags since like last century. So they have been able to fine tune all the kinks in the, production process for years, like 30, 40 years, sometimes even longer for a lot of these brands. So you are not just going to go to a new region and be able to, achieve that same level of output that quickly. It's just not going to happen. And you can see that's the case based on exactly what they are saying in this report. But reading on, Pouchard acknowledged there had been such cases in the past, but the issue had been resolved. This dates back to 2018 and one particular manager who isn't part of the company anymore, he said. Poorly crafted handbags deemed unfit for sale are shredded on site and carted away in trucks for incineration. 2 of the sources with knowledge of the firm's supply chain said. Okay, so that's a problem. That's a big problem. So what they do is they shred the bags and incinerate them. That is not good. That is not great. That's not great at all. That is not what I wanted to read. I wanted to read that they use the waste and use it for accessories and stuff like that. So they're telling me that the 40% of wasted leather hides get incinerated. Oh my gosh, where are the sustainability journalists and sustainability activists talking about this? Of course, this report is very new, but I'd like to see more sustainability advocates talk about this because, wow, shredded on site and carted away in trucks for incineration. That still happens in 2025. That is not good. That is not good. Reading on, a former production supervisor who often traveled to the site and said Louis Vuitton mostly used the Texas plant for less sophisticated handbag models, producing its most expensive products elsewhere. No surprises there because the expertise and the skill set is not in the US. So it makes sense why they would produce, their most basic bags in the US. And even though they are producing their most basic bags in the US, they still have the worst performance and the most waste out of all their factories worldwide. Insane. Pouchard, Louis Vuitton's industrial director, said the company was being patient with a young factory. Any bag that goes out of it must be a Louis Vuitton bag. We make sure it meets exactly the same quality, he said. I'm not aware of any kinds of issues suggesting the quality coming from Texas is any different from that coming from Europe. Perched behind a hill, the handbag maker's 2 production facilities were built on grounds near grazing cattle and a gas well. Louis Vuitton named the site Rochambeau in tribute to a French general who fought in the Revolutionary War. Workers at the site make components and entire models of Louis Vuitton handbags like Felice pochettes and Métis bags with Made in USA tags inside. The items sell for around $1,500 and $3,000 at high-end boutiques. LVMH declined to comment when asked which handbag models are fully or partially made in Texas, but former workers interviewed by Reuters mentioned the Carryall, the Keepall, the Métis, the Felice and the Neverfull handbag lines among the plant's products. In its marketing material, Louis Vuitton says its handbags, typically made at French, Spanish, or Italian leather ateliers by artisans known as petites mains, are assembled using a process that it has perfected since the mid 19th century. So I'm going to call cap on this only because I'm going to call cap on this for two reasons. The first reason, we have seen so many reports of LVMH working with third-party manufacturers that LVMH claims they don't know what's going on there. So that's the first thing. Second of all, even though they have perfected their assembly line since the 19th century, I do agree that they probably had. The expertise is there. However, the workers are not in the US. So there are generations of people in Italy and in France that have been making leather bags, like literally families of generations that have this craftsmanship and expertise. That does not exist in the US. So that's why they're struggling to find enough skilled workers, because there isn't, that same history of that same craftsmanship in the US the same way that there is in the likes of Italy or France. So even if they have the right process, they don't have the skilled workers. So them trying to make this argument that there's no issue, I'm going to call big cap on that. I think that's cap. But reading on, after cutting canvas and leather using hand tools and laser cutting machines, they stitch pieces together using industrial sewing machines. So I'm going to call cap on this because I recently visited the Celine factory, which is also an LVMH brand. And in the Celine factory, they told me that it takes workers approximately 4 to 5 years of training before they are allowed to work on every aspect of the creation of most of the Celine bags. So if we're going to take that understanding, how long has the LVMH, Louis Vuitton factory been in Texas? And that tells you that there's absolutely no way they could possibly have enough skilled workers at that factory, just based on having to train workers for up to 5 years for them to comfortably work on every aspect of the creation of each bag. So big cap, I'm going to call big cap on that. Foul on the play, guys. But reading on, workers at the Texas facility, which includes dedicated floors for cutting and for assembly, as well as a warehouse, were initially paid $13 per hour. As of 2024, base pay for a leather worker position at the plant was $17 per hour, according to two people who recently applied for positions. The minimum wage in Texas is $7.25 an hour. A former leather worker who arrived as a migrant in the US some years before said she felt proud when she was hired by a prestigious French brand, but said some workers struggled to meet the brand's quality standards and production targets. We are under a lot of pressure to make the daily goals, said the former worker, who left the factory at the end of 2019. Another person who worked at the facility until 2023 said she cut corners, like using a hot pin to melt canvas and leather to conceal imperfections in a particularly difficult piece called the Vendome Opera bag. Another former leather worker said they'd seen multiple people melt material to hide holes or other imperfections in stitching. And that's insane because, once again, going to Celine, talking about the Celine factory, because I is in my mind because I went there recently. But Celine, you can't compare Louis Vuitton to Celine because Celine quality is way better than LV. It's not even close. But the quality control at Celine is insane. Like, they inspect the leather hides constantly at every stage to make sure that there aren't like imperfections or there isn't damage. So based on what I saw, at least, looking at the way that Celine manufactures things, they would be able to tell if someone was cutting corners and just like burning things to kind of smoothen the surfaces and stuff like that, because they studied like the fabrics to make sure it's a-okay. So that shows that there's damn near zero quality control at these plants in Texas, that people are just like, burning the surface to smoothen it out. And these things are kind of going unchecked until these reports are being done. So that's crazy. Quality control is seriously lacking there. Seriously lacking there. But reading on, Damien Verbrig, Louis Vuitton's international manufacturing director, conceded some at the Texas plant had chosen to change jobs or leave because of its stringent quality requirements. I'm going to call cap on that. Of course, the manufacturing director would say that they have stringent quality requirements, but that doesn't seem to be the case based on the reports we're reading and the accounts of people that used to work there. But let's see what their their what they say in their quote. So they said, let's see. There are artisans that we hire, who we train, and who, after several weeks or months, realize, in light of the expectations, the level of detail that is required, they would rather work in other fields like logistics, he said. Some people choose to leave us because it's true that it's a job that requires a lot of savoir-faire. 3 former workers at the plant said that they received between 2 and 5 weeks of training. So once again, guys, this is why I called Cap immediately, because I literally just visited a factory by an LVMH brand, which was the Celine in that case. You cannot train someone within 2 to 5 weeks. 2 to 5 weeks is not enough for, workers to be skilled enough to work on these bags. Any person that works in the industry, works in production, works in any sort of factory, works in manufacturing, will tell you that, 2 and 5 weeks of training is nowhere even remotely closely long enough to be able to allow them to even go close to these bags. So once again, absolutely ludicrous. Absolutely ludicrous. But let's read on. A current Louis Vuitton employee in France said receiving just a few weeks of training wasn't unusual, as most learning happens on the production line supervised by more experienced craftspeople. That's not true. That's literally not true. Knowledge of sewing on leather/canvas is a plus, but not required. We offer comprehensive training, the company said in a job posting for artisan positions in Alvarado, published on its website in January. So I agree with this partially, right? You don't necessarily need knowledge of sewing on leather or canvas because they offer comprehensive training. But once again, the comprehensive training is more than 5 weeks. It's not 5 weeks long. 5 weeks is not long enough to teach someone how to effectively sew a Louis Vuitton bag. It just doesn't make sense. That doesn't make any sense. But reading on, Verbrugge said training in Texas is exactly the same program we have in all our workshops. That is 6 weeks on the training line, where new artisans do nothing but learn basic operations and skills before going on to train on the assembly line. There, he said, they are accompanied by continuously mentored by trainers. So that's just not true. Because if you allow someone who's been working, has only been trained for 6 weeks, to actually start working on the bags, it will lead to a lot of waste because they will make a lot of mistakes. And with a lot of these luxury brands, if you make the slightest mistake, they can't put that bag into production anymore, so they have to get rid of it or try to salvage the rest of the leather and use that for accessories. That's definitely the case in Celine, which is why how it works in the Celine factory is normally they teach you how to do only one specific process of making the bag, and even that process takes longer than 6 weeks. After some of these, so I think they said it's close to a year before you're even allowed to start working on the bags. So you just practice and practice. And then after that year is only enough for you to work on a specific part of the process. And then the next year, as time progresses, they then teach you each different stage of making that bag and making different bags. And then by the end of 4 to 5 years, that's when you now have the skills to make a bag from beginning to end. So you can work on any part of the production of each bag, right? That's how it works, literally how it works. So this idea that, you just train for 6 weeks and then you start working on the bags and you're just supervised by someone is just not true. And I say this as someone that literally visited a factory run by an LVMH brand less than 2 months ago. So no, I don't agree with that. But reading on, LVMH got a host of tax breaks and incentives from Johnson County, including a 10-year, 75% property tax cut, promising the company an estimated $29 million in savings. We look forward to serving this exceptional company, wrote the county's top executive, Roger Harmon, in 2017 correspondence seen by Reuters. In its 2017 application letter for tax abatement, obtained by Reuters through records request, LVMH said it was aiming to hire 500 people within the first 5 years of the plan. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony in 2019, Arnault said, "We will create approximately 1,000 high-skilled jobs here at the Rochambeau over the next 5 years." 3 former staffers, however, said headcount stood at just under 300 workers in February 2025, a figure Verbrugge confirmed. The White House did not respond to Reuters' request for comment. Pritchard said initial recruitment difficulties were largely due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown that followed, adding that a decline in local demand also played a role. Despite the problems, LVMH is planning to move even more jobs to Texas. LVMH said in its 2017 filing that its first Texas production facility would cost around $30 million. Now, let's actually pause there for a second to talk about stuff that they said. So they said that they would have 500 workers. Staffers have said that the headcount is actually closer to 300 workers as at February 2025, which is hilarious because if they're having all these issues hiring staff in one plant, how exactly are they going to move all of this production from China and Italy and, Vietnam and all this stuff all into the US? I just really want to know how exactly they're going to do that. I just don't understand how that's possible, to be honest. I just don't see. I'm curious to know what they can even teach in 2 weeks. Yeah, I need to figure that out too. They're claiming that they train people in 2 to 5 weeks. That is literally Looney Tunes behavior. Kind of what Art is saying. Yeah, 2 to 5 weeks is Looney Tune crazy. Facts. Doesn't even make any sense. I'm surprised that a lot of LV representatives say stuff like this with their chest when anyone that works in the industry knows that all of that doesn't make sense. But obviously they're saying that to cover their backs, as anyone that works for a company will. But it's just too ridiculous. Like, no one's going to believe that. No one is believing that. Literally no one is believing that. But let's read the last part of the article. A second filing from 2022 to local authorities put the cost of its second workshop completed last year at $23.5 million. At a town hall last fall, workers at one of the two California production sites were told that it would close 2028 and that they could move to Texas or quit, according to a former employee who was present. Pritchard confirmed the town hall and said Louis Vuitton intended to streamline its California operations and transfer more skilled artisans to Texas, with so far limited success. Its executives, he said, underestimated the fact that Texas is far away from California. So that really is what's going on in terms of the LVMH Texas manufacturing issues. And I think it was very important to talk about because there's all of this conversation around we should move manufacturing to the US without any understanding of how difficult it is to actually bring this manufacturing to the US. It's possible, but it's going to take way longer than people think, and it's not going to be as advantageous as a lot of people think. So that's why I wanted to cover this story. I think it's very interesting. Let me see what you guys are saying in the chat. I'm very, very curious. They don't know the distance from Cali to Texas. I guess they don't have access to a map, which is very, very odd, isn't it? Clearly, I don't know how they didn't know how far California is from Texas when you can literally just Google that, but each to their own. Each to their own. So just took a look at the Celine bag since you speak so what fondly of the quality, I think you meant to say. Sad to see all of them look so basic. The logo hardware looks bad. It isn't bad. If you see the Celine hardware in person, it's actually really, really good. It maybe online it looks bad, but in person it's really good. In terms of the designs being basic, I think it depends on what you're talking about. Also, I'm not a Celine spokesperson, by the way, so don't think of me like that. However, that part of the reason why they keep it simple in a lot of the bags is it allows them, or it makes it easier for them to, kind of keep control and take control over the quality of the production of the bags, to be honest. But yeah, my experience with Celine, and I've been saying this for years, even before I went to the factory or whatever, is that their quality of garments, especially ready to wear, oh my gosh, is way better than most brands, especially luxury brands and fashion. But yeah, let me see. Okay, it seems like you guys don't have much more to say about the LVMH story. Courtesy of Reuters. Of course, we're looking at it via the New York Post, but this is actually a Reuters article, as I've mentioned before. Hello, Dami. How are you?
Good evening. Good evening. Yeah, it's quite late, but shout out to involved. Which particular story were you just covering?
The LVMH having issues with their production plant in Texas, their Louis Vuitton
Oh,
production plant in Texas.
yes. Interesting, interesting. I was otherwise indisposed. Which points did you actually point out when you were talking about this.
So I was really just talking about the fact that I think people are oversimplifying how easy it's going to be to move manufacturing from all the different countries that Trump has imposed heavy tariffs on to the US, because that's kind of the point of it. That's been the message that, we need to bring back American jobs, American industry, American production, and stuff like that. But I think people are underestimating the kind of training that needs to go into creating skilled workers that can actually produce these things to the quality that is required, and that's why LVMH is having so many issues.
I think most of the smart minds said, it's not totally a bad idea, but that type of stuff takes like 20 years,
Yep.
13 years at least, and you do a slow crawl rather than doing what you're doing. But just based on Trump's temperament or Big T's temperament, I'm going to start calling him Big T from now on because
Big
of
T.
accent. Yeah, or the orange man. It doesn't really matter. But Big T's temperament is that just one of those things where at this present moment in time, he's gonna do whatever he wants because he has a consortium of people around him that will allow him to do whatever he wants. Remember the inauguration when he had all of the billionaires? Like it was
Yeah,
probably
including
the
Bernard
most
Arnault.
powerful stage. Yeah, exactly. This is where I'm going to, including like it's probably the most powerful stage that we've ever seen in this decade, as in the most powerful billionaires, not even like oligarchs or politicians or anything, just richest people in the world standing right
Yeah.
beside him. And then, these things, LVMH, I guess Bernard thought it wasn't going to necessarily affect him, but, we have this story here. This way I'm going to land my plane. And yeah, I'm going to let you lead from now on. But that's just
No,
my
I just wanted to know what your thoughts are, especially because like they're struggling to find enough skilled workers, first of all, which they said has been one of their biggest issues. They're also saying that they can't get people long enough. So people join, realize kind of what's required in terms of how meticulous they have to be when making these bags, and then they just quit.
yeah.
And so that's like going to be a big issue that they're going to face like moving forward for
Okay,
sure.
I think not to cut you off, but I think it's a really really good point to make that Italy and Paris breeds a type of behavior where people slow down and want to make things. And just like there are these not just governmental incentives, but social incentives as well that make people want to be bag makers.
It's
Just
also it's a
oh,
culture. Like when I
there we
when I
go. Yeah.
visited when I visited the Celine factory in Italy, people were so prideful of the fact that they were part of the process and the savoir faire, and they were actually quite passionate about it. Like when I talked about people that worked in a factory, they were like, "Yeah, I love the fact that I'm part of this like big process and we all work together to make these." But there's like a pride there
Mm.
because of kind of how it's been passed down. Like the understanding of doing these things has been passed down from generation to generation. There's a pride in the luxury industry as a whole because a lot of French people feel like it's one of their biggest industries, so they take pride in it. Same thing with Italians. So there's a pride behind like helping these industries to keep running and keeping these industries flowing in the country, and that pride doesn't necessarily follow through in the US. And even though, like, let's say some of these people in the factories aren't really well paid, like in terms of they're not rich, right? Which will be the same case in like the Texas factory in the US. But for some reason, there still tends to be this culture pride around crafting these things I don't think is in the US.
Yeah, one thing is that it's not one of those things where you have to be rich. And this is part of the societal, like you're saying, culture, because it's more than that. It's ingrained in the social system. The
Hmm.
way Parisians take breaks from work. And like when we were like because of Britain and we're from London, so we have the finance sector and we're like, oh go, 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 go. But then Parisians have a totally different ethic in corporate, like corporate Parisians have a different ethic as
Hmm.
opposed to British ones. Whereas like we're possibly in the middle of like between America and somewhere along the Atlantic space. But in terms of the way that people work in not just the rural areas, but even in the cities, the major fashion hubs that are not in England or America is just different. Like they're slower and their lives don't necessarily concern the need to become six figure, seven figure earners
Hmm.
to feel good about themselves and their livelihood, because the work and the craftsmanship just happens to be more important sometimes, because they are craftsmen, they're craftspeople. They're not just, people that are out there getting a paycheck. It's
Hmm.
not a grind, like you were saying, and like the way that they were, they would go on these poetic, almost soliloquies about the way they enjoy working. People, you don't get that here. You don't get that in America. That's not the way
Hmm.
that people think about their work. Only on the highest level that people actually say that. And, of course, you're gonna pretend or act as if you're, you know, fulfilled when you're earning millions and millions, but then, we do have those people that unalive themselves and they're billionaires or
I think it's possible to like do things where you're going to earn less money, but you're passionate about it. It's kind of like, for example, I love talking about fashion, so I would rather review a runway show than talk about something else that might maybe get more views and then therefore make me more money, if that makes sense. So
Mm.
I think it just depends, because like if I was to observe like fashion YouTube and see like what makes the most money, it's probably making like trend videos, like spring, summer trends, autumn, winter trends, 2025 trends, and just like spamming those videos. I could spam those and get views, but I'm just not passionate about stuff like that. So I'd rather make less money doing what I'm more passionate about. And I guess you can use that understanding to like a lot of people that in Italy or France that take pride in kind of what they produce. It's not really about money. It's they see it as, so long as I can make a living doing this, if I enjoy this is what I enjoy. So I think that pride and passion is something that hasn't followed through to the US the same way it is in Europe, for
Yeah,
sure.
I would argue, when has it ever been in the US for real?
I think
Like,
I think in the US there's a pride for things, maybe just not luxury goods. I think there's a
well,
pride.
I'm talking about in work, in labor. There's a pride in exploitation. Like, I want to be so totally honest about this. The
Yeah.
US, like, especially from my concerned effort to understand history, the US from the beginning, let's just start in making railroads. Yeah, I'm not even gonna go to the place that everybody usually goes. Let's just go to the railroads. Those things, especially the steel mills and the oil wells and everything like that, that was based on exploitative labor of like just normal everyday Americans, and then obviously Great Depression, so on and so forth.
Yeah, Jennifer,
But
this is what I was going to mention. The first thing when I think of US pride is the automotive industry. Like the
yeah,
car labor, I think Americans are really passionate and prideful
about
about
cars.
the
Okay,
cars
this
and
I think well, not just think, I believe, right? Just based on the history, like from over 100 years ago, I wouldn't necessarily say that they were prideful in the way that they were thinking they were cross people in the earlier, like the turn of the centuries, in my opinion. Anyways,
no, I think the people that used to produce the cars were probably like, from what I've seen, because I'm quite like into like cars, obviously. So like I follow like the history of cars in the US and stuff. I think they were prideful. They were very prideful. Also, it was because like it's kind
wait,
of like
in which decade? Let me
in
check.
most decades actually, because how it's always been seen by Americans is that they want to prove that they make the best cars and they make better cars than the Japanese and then the Germans specifically. So that's why they're always like,
They want to prove they make better cars than the Japanese and the Germans.
I don't think they do, but
No,
that's kind of where their pride
but
comes
no,
from.
but this the interesting thing about this, right? Okay, let's put pride to the side, as we always should do. But in terms of like quality American vehicles, yeah, Americans have been great craftspeople throughout the centuries, right? But then when we have Ferrari and all of the other engine makers, right? Because like, I guess my point was still in exploitation. It was, they had to, like, when Americans had their massive boom in the automotive industry, it was during the war. It was during the Great
Hmm.
War. So like, are we really saying that they were proud? What were they necessarily prideful in when it was time to innovate during the Great War? It wasn't based on, oh, we need to make the best vehicles. It was, we're making unaliving machines.
No, it was about making the best vehicles. That's why like even companies like Ford especially hold like a
Oh,
certain like
okay.
there's like a pro-American sentiment to driving a Ford. And I think it comes out of that pride that I'm talking about the Americans have
I
of
love I love an F-150 more than the next guy, but the same way, like, I don't think the innovation was necessarily based
yeah.
on wanting to make the best truck per se. But yeah. That's just my
Yeah,
thought.
I think the American pride is definitely there. I just think it's less so there now, which is why in the manufacturing space, if you're trying to bring all this manufacturing to the US, it might be difficult because people probably won't want to do those jobs, especially if like the wages don't make sense for most people, right? Because it's really, really toiling, laboring work, and if the wages don't make sense, it's like why would anyone in the US want to do that?
Honestly, yeah, no, I understand the pride in like the 80s 100%, especially when it was Ford, GM, Chrysler in Detroit, Michigan, and everything like that. But then we saw what happened there in the turn of the millennium, right?
Hmm.
Where all of those jobs got like taken out and shipped off to another space. Like
Yeah.
Japan wants to make things, Germany wants to make things, right? And then, of
Yeah,
course,
also
mm,
Steve Van Gogh. So that's what I was saying. So in fashion specifically, the pride certainly isn't there for the most part, which is why we're talking about LVMH having a problem. Obviously, we're having a wider conversation around like, is there this prideful sentiment across the whole of the US? But in terms of clothing, I don't think it's there the same way that it was once.
wait, the
Sure.
pride in clothes as well.
Yeah, like during the time of like the Battle of Versailles and stuff, there was like this because there was this
Okay.
sentiment of the fact that, the French think that they're so good and, we brought American designers and we caught them by storm. So around when the Battle of Versailles
You know
happened,
what? I take
there
back
was,
what I said. You're absolutely right. They
yeah,
were prideful.
around the
Pride is
time
going
that the
too
Battle of
far.
Versailles happened, people wanted to be designers and they wanted to like stick it to the French and stuff. But I don't think that has slowed down. So I don't think it's the same. There's that same pride that there was in American
Yeah,
designers that there was back then.
like Americans are great competitors. This is what I love about Americans, right? But then when they're not trying to compete, they're competing against each other. What is the nature of it all? What's the nature
Yeah,
of the beast? And just to go back to the LVMH thing, I don't necessarily think that Texas would be the space to make these types of leather goods because I've seen people that are working in Texas and what's that place? Oklahoma, all of these places, right? They make horse
right.
saddles, they make cowboy boots. You know, I know people that even make prom dresses, like cotillion dresses, all of these other things, right? So they do actually have a nest,
Yeah.
like they have crafts people in these spaces. But then when we're talking about luxury leather goods, handbags, I think those are like that's just a different
Yeah. So
space. That's a
Jennifer,
different
this is really a really fascinating point you brought up about like outsourcing because like Jennifer said, I repeat, outsourcing. So the interesting thing about this is once again, I think the reason why a lot of these things are outsourced comes to the lack of pride because I'll tell you why. So in Japan, a lot of machines, especially the really old ones that they use, actually come from the US. A lot of machines that they use to make the denim in Japan that we love and we're like, oh my God, this is so amazing. A lot of that machinery was actually made in the US. So the funny thing is that the Japanese see more value in these American machines than Americans do themselves. And Japanese producers are more passionate about using this like old machinery than Americans are themselves. And that I think is part of the pride because it's almost like pride makes you care about things and that makes you want to keep things going. The same way that Japanese really strongly care about these things and want to keep these production processes going. So I think that's kind of down to the pride we're talking about. I think the reason why a lot of these things are outsourced is because maybe the Americans don't deem it as profitable enough, and so they're not passionate about it. So they start outsourcing it everywhere, and then you have other countries that jump in, like Japan, and take the mantle from the Americans.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question and I legit forgot it because I was so engrossed in your point. The bags, what they were
Mhm.
making, right, in Texas. What was the reason? Like what was the reason for them making the bags in Texas? Did they say in the thing?
I think it's a tax thing because that's why they have productions in California and they're like closing those down and then moving everything to Texas. So it's probably going to be because of tax.
Yeah, because I know they do make like they make Audis in Cali, right? Like so as in like they have designers, they have people that design in Cali, and they have people that design. I think they do have a base in Miami as well. But yeah, there are people that make cars and all of these other things in
Texas
America.
does give a lot of tax breaks, which is why they're
So what in
like I said, it's
particular
it's
though?
tax. Oh, just
Like
in
we talk,
general, in
are we talk about corporation tax? Or are we talking
across the
about
board, across the
tax?
board. I even think, guys, correct me if I'm wrong, Americans in the chat, but isn't income tax in Texas lower than most other states? Like, I know Texas is like really good for like taxes, like lower than most places. That's why I remember there was a point in time when I think Joe Rogan moved to Texas, and like so many other prominent figures in the US who make a lot of money moved to Texas because all of them were being given like very favorable like tax rates, corporate income, everything, just across the board. Like the tax
Yeah,
is like
it
quite
doesn't
low.
have an income tax apparently.
Yeah.
Texas has a 6.2% state tax, sale tax, but yeah, that's it really.
Yeah, no state tax in Texas or Florida. So no state tax in Texas. So that's exactly what it is. And this is also a good point. Texas has immigrant workers that can cross the border for work, so they don't even pay the workers well either. That's a good point too, which is why there's a lot of manufacturing going on there for that reason also. So it's a very, very, very interesting. Let me, oh yeah, I would love to get Al on. Al wants to hop on as a Texas correspondent. Yeah, Al would be the perfect person to speak about this actually, because Al's from Houston, Texas. So I'd love to get his insight on all of this actually. But they heave. Oh my god. Side note, quick side note. Damn, you know the way property tax works in the US, right?
Yeah,
Bro, when I figured out how crazy property tax in the US is, I was like, damn. They tax you a percentage of the value of your house every year. It's not like
yeah,
in the UK where like once you buy the house you own it, and the only tax you pay is like council tax or whatever, which isn't that much money.
yeah.
So
I
if
read a
you have an
story about a
expensive
woman.
house,
Yeah, go.
your property tax is like through the roof. I was like, damn,
Yeah,
that's expensive.
I read a story that a woman lost her house because she didn't pay $5,000. The house is worth 5 million.
Yeah. So like in the UK,
That's
someone
crazy.
could gift you a house and you could afford to keep it. But in the US, someone can gift you a house, but if you can't afford to pay like the property taxes, then you can't really keep it.
That's why it's so expensive to live in like New York and spaces like that.
Yeah.
Crazy work though.
But you are muted, but would love to get your expert opinion on what's been going on in Texas and Texas manufacturing.
Yeah, I would say that the main thing, sorry I'm reporting on a bus, but the main thing that I would say is that Texas, in terms of manufacturing, we're really known for manufacturing like very few things. Like one of them is cars. It's like the Toyota Tundra is produced here, and year over year, like they keep seeing increase in sales. I think from 2014, they increased like 25%. So like it's a very healthy market here, mostly because like here in Texas, the size of your vehicle is more of a sign of luxury than the make of your vehicle. Just like it's like a cultural thing. Like it's not about
That's
getting
so
the
American, by
flashiest
the way.
engine or the fastest ride or the sportiest make. It's about having the biggest effing car you can possibly get. And the Toyota Tundra isn't like the highest range of that, which is like these giant King Ranch Ford F-150s. But Toyota is like a heavily respected brand and does like I think over well Toyota in America does 2.6 billion in sales versus only 1.6 in Japan, right? So like they're bigger here in America and they do like over 100,000 units of sales in Toyota Tundras. Just that model itself. It's not the most popular model all over America, but it's the most popular in Texas. It is something of status symbol to drive these big ass trucks, right? So there is a lot of pride in the fact that those are made here in Texas. And I would say the main thing that may have not been brought up on the stream yet is that the reason why you see a lot of pride in like I think auto manufacturing because historically that's a union industry, right? There is a bit of a social safety net that's built into like the industry there that isn't in like being a craftsman. The idea of like showing up to work as a craftsman, maybe even starting at $17 an hour and maybe ending up at like $48 an hour in 10 years, like that's not something that appeals to people because like if something were to happen and they lose their ability to work, that's it. There's no like 401k benefits that they're giving these people, right? So you're not going to get people who are American craftsmen who are interested in pursuing something where they have no ownership over the product, right? They can't, there's definitely like this idea of showing up to the rodeo with your own like leatherworking and like a bit of ownership over your product that isn't necessarily a luxury focus, but Sorry, there's an announcement going on a
No,
bus.
that's all right.
Currently on the way to Osaka.
You're
The
on vocal isolation, so we can't hear
Yeah,
it.
what was I saying? The
He was saying that they're unionized, which is a big reason why. Which is a good point to bring up because in fashion, in let's say Italy and France, there are a lot of protections for workers. And in the clothing manufacturing space in the US, it seems like those protections aren't really there the same way, or to the same level at least, or to the same extent.
Well, in the early days, like let's take Walmart for instance, right? People were getting shares as part of a company, right? And on the other hand, in the well, where the car companies and car manufacturers moved, there wasn't any stocks and shares for people that were, let's say, in our generation when we first started wanting to get jobs, right? Or people turning 18 from 2010. So the whole job market was in a collapse mode. I didn't want to use any slang terminology while I was on here, but it was in a shambles. We were, in a recession, going into a depression, especially in America, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't the best place for the job market, and nobody was giving out ownership. And America has spoke about ownership for like centuries now, but at the same time it's like, is ownership the only way people can take ownership of the type of work that they do in terms of how much they
Hmm.
value a craft? Because especially when we speak about the honorary crafts, right, like writing or videography, documentary making, all of these things, right? The things that don't necessarily pay the most money, but have value in community and have value nationwide. People don't necessarily need to be owners of the company to be big writers.
Yeah, I see that. But it's interesting though because in the UK, as a journalist, you're not going to make a lot of money, but a lot of people still want to be journalists though. Like a lot of people want to write for BBC and like have an impact in the way that media is shared and all that sort of stuff. So it's just a different like
Yeah.
reasoning for why they want to do the job in the first place. It's not like they don't go in it with the intention of I'm trying to be like rich or I'm trying to make like six figures or like that sort of stuff.
But yeah, we're talking about the American dream, and part of the American dream is greed. So, and I
Yeah.
know, the way that I post what I was saying earlier before was, but I want to be 100% frank. The American, like the way that at least time has progressed and shown itself, greed has lived better, and the other seven deadly sins, right? Than inherent love and value for the things that people make. Like just on a mass scale, like once a company scales to a certain point, they're not trying to give out stocks and shares to people.
Of course not. Is there like, why should we give anyone, even though you guys basically helped build the company to where it is, but why
Yeah.
should we give you
And they will
a.
liquidate those shares and make them fractional shares, so on and so forth.
The worst one is when, oh my God, the worst one is when they offer workers at the start an incentive by giving them like stock options. And then when the company, performs even better than a lot of these execs thought it could, they start diluting these people's shares to the point where they almost have no value. And it's like, so why did you give them stock options then if you're just gonna make it have no value? Like you should you should just not even offer them the stock options and like tease them in the first place. What's the point?
But yeah, like that notwithstanding though, I guess there's a myriad of reasons why, Louis Vuitton had trouble. And they're not necessarily ingrained. No matter what, they're a foreign company.
Hmm.
And the way that Americans treat foreign entities is definitely different than the way Americans treat homegrown businesses. Like that's why people are really berating Elon Musk right now. It's partially not just because of what he's done per se, but because he's just not an American. Like at any given moment, someone will bring up the fact that he's from South Africa. He's a foreigner. Like that is literally who they're fighting against, foreigners. And Elon Musk's home nation is part of BRICS.
Yep.
So like let's not, and his family is wealthy, so they're gonna actually, what's the word again? They're gonna profit. They're gonna profit from what's happening with BRICS of nations, right? So yeah, let's not get confused. Like Elon Musk will still be all right, and his, whether his stock climbs or it falls or whatever it is, what I'm saying, it's all dependent on how people feel about him in that country. So when we start talking about Louis Vuitton now, I don't even know whether the average American has heard Bernard Arnault speak. So what type of
Probably,
pride?
definitely not. Actually, definitely not. Definitely not.
Yeah. Listen, I'm just hedging. I could have said it like that, but I didn't want to. But once they heard the French accent, Americans don't like the French for a lot of reasons. But especially in the older generation, one of the main reasons, and the French don't like Americans. Like it's not like this one way street.
Yeah, 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 I know.
But it's because the French waved the white flag in the war. Like that is the reason I get from most all Americans of a certain age. Like it's part and parcel of the way that people move here. So it's like I don't understand. No, it's not that I don't understand. It's that the value that Louis Vuitton has in America is way different than what the proposed thought process. Because I did not see an idea or spec or example of the fact that people would start caring about making Louis Vuitton bags in America so that a French company can profit.
From an American perspective, the Louis Vuitton bag is the exact same thing as an iPhone. It's a fancy luxury product designed in a like first world country and manufactured by like somebody that we pay as little as possible. Right? There's not the connection. There's a total. What is the I think Marxian language that people use? There's a total alienation of the worker from the craft. Right? That's how like luxury is built. Is that it's more about the brand than it is about like the craft itself.
Mm.
Like, and if people want craft, they do go to artisans. There is this culture here of like, oh, you know, there are local leather workers and so on and so forth. You can get that if that's what you're into. But if you're into Louis Vuitton, you're not into it for the craft at all.
Yeah, I mean that's the case almost everywhere in terms of like people who are more, and especially if you can afford it, people who have, you know, actually care about the craft or more likely, you know, get their suits made at Savile Row. They're not gonna buy, you know, a super expensive like suit that costs like 7K off the rack, which some rich people do. But that comes down to like who cares about craft, who doesn't, and all this kind of conversations that we've had a lot earlier. Actually, you had long conversations about that. So yeah, interesting topic. This YouTube channel runs on your support. If you want to support the channel, you can subscribe to my Patreon. You'll gain access to exclusive content that includes everything from my Patreon podcast, where I give a behind the scenes insight into the fashion industry, as well as a fashion book club where I review my favorite fashion books. You can also check out my fashion ebook, which highlights the best fashion journalists to follow, definitions of common fashion terminology, and how to determine what a good source of fashion information is. The links to everything are in the description below.